To a certain degree, most guitar players can bore the pants off non-savvy guitar-related people at parties, but if we want to know all the nitty-gritty facts, the myths and legends about those very early blues players and their acoustic guitars, we have to call on an expert. Aside from being a successful artist, singer-songwriter, author and record producer, Paul Brett is known around the world as a blues historian and indeed an expert on historic acoustic guitars. And he's also designed his own highly successful guitar lines based on the originals. And he's here with us now. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Lars. I've been known to bore the pants off a few people, mate.
I know. It's a bit of a long introduction, but it was true. You are a blues historian and you are just full of those facts, and I've talked to you so many times and I've learnt lots from you. Let's just go straight in and talk about your own guitar lines and the designs. These are based on some of the original acoustic models those early bass players used way back to the 1920s.
Yeah, I had a call from, I think 2010, from Dennis Drum, who's the managing director of Vintage Guitars, and he just rang me up out of the blue and asked me if I would design a 12-string for him. So we went up and had a meeting. I came away and I used my Wayman, which is 1920s, it's the only one in the world, Wayman 12-string, as an inspiration to kind of design the 12-string model. Small-bodied parlour size, which was unusual for a 12-string, and also the beauty about what I used is the actual neck angle, which is a lot steeper back than the original 12 strings, or most of the 12 strings they used, and it actually the end result was beautiful, as you'll see by the comparison videos.
Now, a lot of those early players used the likes of the Stellars and the Sovereigns. Now, these were sturdy guitars, but they had no frills or anything exotic about them. Why were they so popular at the time?
They were affordable, mate, simple as that. They were kind of $1.98 or something for the real cheap ones, and made out of birch. And of course, you know, the majority of people that played them had no money. They used to freight hop on trains to get the gigs, playing juke joints, just for beer money, really. So basically, it was a popularity thing, was the price.
And of course, that, like you said, birch construction, it had that birchy sort of sound, and that's the sound we all relate to, and try and get from, you know, new guitars, which you have done, and we'll talk about that in a minute. A few years ago, I came up and photographed your incredible collection for a guitar magazine. I was astounded how many you had from, you know, way back to the 18th, 19th centuries, 1920s, 1930s, and you've used those. Well, they've been a benchmark for the models you've designed.
Yeah, they have. I think the earliest one I've got, although, you know, it's way back in the classical era, was about 1798 in, you know, the romantic guitar thing, German. But it's a beautiful guitar, but my main collection lies in the sort of early 1900s to up to today's date, really. But, you know, mainly it's 1900s to end of the 1930s. Basically the blues era, and when Oscar Schmidt made a lot of the Stellars and Sovereigns that were very popular at the time in the States. And, you know, they've just continued through the years. Basically, I think why they're popular is all the blues pioneers played them, you know, and we kind of associate with that early music. At least, you know, a lot of the English bands in the 60s did, like the Stones and the Yardbirds, even the Beatles to some extent, you know, and my old mate who I played with, and it was a pleasure to play with, Lonnie Donegan. He had the rejigged Leadbelly song, Rock Island Line, and probably had the first hit in the 50s, you know, using a blues-based song. Without Lon, actually, we wouldn't have had British pop music like it is today, if you think about it.
That's right, because we're relating to that sound at the time, because that's all they had. And like you say, it's so interesting. They went round the juke joints, standing on the corners, and really didn't mind if they got damaged.
Well, no, you know, and I mean, there probably was a few put over people's heads as well. You know, on a late night booze up. But it's like everything else in life. It's why basically I've kept the same principle with the guitars that we do with vintage, is that we kind of keep the prices as low as possible, but the quality of the builds are very high.
Of course, we're talking way back when there weren't that many guitar shops around, and these were sort of available like household goods from the famous Sears and Roebuck catalogue.
Yeah, also, don't forget that there was a lot of guitars being sold, but they were sold in general stores basically across America. You know, you could buy a pair of knickers and a guitar, you know, a pair of socks and a guitar, or soap and a guitar in the general stores. So there wasn't actually any dedicated shops as such. There were probably a few in the cities, but mainly right across the country, especially in the country areas. These were general stores. These were where they were sold.
And the guitars you've designed under the vintage brand have got that aura, you know, or that 1930s feel, but you've used quality tone woods, looked at the modern approach to playing frets and the sound, and they look very good.
Another feature of the build back then was ladder braced, as opposed to the later X bracing, and I've used ladder bracing on a few of my guitars, especially like the Stagebrush 12 string, the big model. Which we designed as a tribute to Blind Willie McTell, because I've got the 1938 McTell model, the Stella Westbrook, and we basically, you know, did it as a tribute to him, and that's ladder braced.
Turn your lamp down low. Have you got enough to trap me from your jaw?
Amongst all the hundreds of acoustic guitars you've got, fingerpicking style, I know you've got a passion for the 12 string, and that played a major role throughout your career when you were, you know, playing acoustic guitar.
Yeah, it did in a way. For the sort of first part of my career, the 60s and up to the mid-70s, I was an electric lead guitar player. Played with lots and lots of name bands and lots of sessions. And I caught the 12 string bug off of Johnny Joyce, who's the British blues pioneer. He was playing it when nobody else was. Purely blues, and he had this what they call a dead thumb roll style, and I caught this off of John because I saw him in a club in Twickenham, the Crown I think it was. And in those days there was no PA, there was no nothing, you know. You just sat up there with a guitar with about 100 people, and I heard this massive sound coming off the stage and a guy singing Stagebrush Blues, Willie McTell song. And I was really taken aback with the fact that, you know, it was loud and it was very, very kind of transient, and people were just like sitting there with their mouths open. So I kind of befriended Johnny, and you know, we became friends. We played together for a long, long time over the years, and I learnt the basic thumb picking off of John. And then from that, I went out and bought a 40 quid K guitar from Woolworths in Fulham, and I spent 6 months developing my own style and wrote the first 12 string guitar suite, Earthbirth.
Yes, I know it well. Of course, those guitars are a big body, big sound, big projection guitars. But a lot of your lines are based on like the travel guitars and the parlors, like the Viator range.
The Viator, basically, I wanted a little travel guitar that had a bit more bottom end than some of the other travel guitars that were going around. So again, I looked at a very early 1908 guitar in my collection, which had the kind of sound that I wanted. So I used that as inspiration and rejigged it, you know, rejigged the look, rejigged the presentation of it, I mean, the one back then had a slot head. I kept the slot head. The first one we did was an acoustic 6-string in the Viator, and that was very, very well received, got a lot of good reviews. And then we put a pickup in it and we put an antique finish on it, and then we released another model like that. And finally we put the 12-string model out, which is actually my favourite guitar in the whole range. Later on we did the tenor guitar in the Viator range, and recently we've just done the Viator Classic with nylon string.
You've also designed and launched the vintage Stagebrush series of acoustic and electric acoustic guitars, 612s and bass as well. And they've got this aptly named whiskey sour finish, like old woody. I mean, they look great on a Uncle Tom Cabin's porch and that, but with a 1930s blues era. But again, you've approached the playability and the sound.
Yeah, I mean, the forerunner of that was the one we did for William McTell, the copy of the 1938 Westbrook, which we put out a few years ago, which is very, very good. It's really traditional blues guitar, sounds like a street corner guitar. And then quite recently, about a year ago, we put the Stagebrush range out, and the price of them are unbelievable. The acoustics are, I think they're retailing for something like £99, and the electroacoustics about £150, something like that, which the build is fantastic and the sound is fantastic. Funny, because I just had a call from Gordon Giltrap. He's got a Stagebrush 12, the original one, and he's used it on his new album, and he said it's absolutely fantastic. He sent me a little sound clip of it, and it sounds like he played it in the cathedral, and he's kind of used his own style, which has taken it away from the original blues style into his style. It sounds absolutely wonderful. So it's actually put it into a different genre, which I'm really well pleased about. But the Stagebrush, according to the vintage guys, are selling really well worldwide and in the UK as well. In fact, I don't think I can get enough of them.
You're a very successful poet as well. Some of the lyrics you've written in verses is just mind-boggling. And I think that had something to do with the Raven model that you designed.
And the latest thing was the Edgar Allan Poe poems. That's not particularly easy to set to music, but I wanted to design a guitar to go with it, so I came up with the Raven. And vintage bit on the idea, and then we produced it. It looks absolutely fantastic, totally different to any other guitar. The sound hole is entirely different. If you put your finger in the middle of the sound hole, you've got two raven heads, either side, if you look at it like that. And the sound of it is wonderful.
And there's the Gemini series as well.
Most people I know that play baritone guitars use them for 2 or 3 numbers at max, if at all, in their sets. And I think the cheapest one I sort of saw was like 500 quid, going up to about 5,000. And I thought, well, they're good baritones, but you obviously can't use them all the time. And I didn't want to pay a load of money for them, so I came up with a Gemini, which is a dual purpose guitar. With baritone strings, it gives you a really good baritone sound, and just change the strings, put a normal set of strings on, and it gives you a good, normal acoustic sound. And I use that really. Say I'll make half a dozen tracks, or maybe a dozen tracks, which I'll record on the 6-string version, Then I'll change the strings and put the baritone on, and then I'll overtrack the baritone, and then put a voice on top, and it really, really gives you a great full sound.
I'm hearing more and more from guitar players all around the world, actually Nashville a lot for some reason. Well, they've got a lot of old acoustic guitars down there, obviously, and they're scared to travel with, let alone gig with, when they're allowed. So they're using vintage guitars. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, it makes me feel great. Obviously, you know, things have changed in Nashville. You couldn't walk down the street without a Martin at one time. You get sneered at, but I guess, you know, everything changes in life. You don't want to take a, you know, few £1,000 plus guitar out on a road gig just in case it gets smashed. I mean, I had a mate over there that bought $5,000 guitar, and he took it out first night. Somebody bumped into it, smashed the head off, and now he's playing a vintage. You know, at $150 or 90, what is it, $110 in America, something like that. And he's well happy with it because he's not bothered about it. If something happens to it, he can buy another one the next day. I think that's got a lot to do with the philosophy behind these things, that people may not have the stigma of being able to take a really expensive guitar out.
You mentioned the early days, from the early days right up to now. Your biography is just rammed, and I noticed there's an anthology come out.
I've got a 94-track, 4-CD anthology coming out. In fact, that's the cover. It's called Stone Survivor, and that's exactly how I feel. And there's 4 CDs in it, judged from the 60s, you know, through to the 70s, through to the 80s and 90s, and the 2000 with the Raven on the front cover as well. And there's a 16-page booklet which has got everything in it. I've done all the bands I've played with. There's a few bands, a lot of unreleased stuff on there from the early days, and a few sessions that I played on that Cherry Red owned the rights to, like Crazy World of Arthur Brown stuff, Union with Elmer Gantry, and Tinton Abbey, one of the best psychedelic bands out of that era.
Well, I highly recommend that, folks, because, Paul, we haven't even touched your brain, your encyclopedia about the blues. Every time I meet you, I learn something different. Thank you so much for coming on Britain's Rare Guitars.
Yeah, thanks. Brilliant, and good luck with it for the future, mate. Let's keep our fingers crossed that we'll be open for business soon.
Take care. Speak to you soon.
Thanks, Lars. Bye.